Tonight on Primetime, pressure continues to mount around the Strait of Hormuz. With tensions rising, US President Donald Trump is urging other countries to step in, demanding help from allies and oil importers to safeguard this vital passage. So who should protect the world's most important oil route? A very good evening. As traffic in the Strait of Hormuz continues to face disruption amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, US President Donald Trump is now calling on countries to send naval vessels to help police this critical stretch of water. But some governments remain reluctant to get involved.
US President Donald Trump says his administration is in talks with 7 countries about helping to secure the Strait of Hormuz amid the US-Israeli war with Iran. The strait has seen reduced traffic following Iranian retaliation against ships linked to what it considers its enemies. Trump insists that nations heavily reliant on oil from the Gulf have a responsibility to help protect the waterway.
We are talking to other countries about working with us on the policing of the strait, and I think we're getting good response. If we do, that's great, and if we don't, that's great too. We are demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory, because it is their territory. It's a place from which they get their energy, and they should come and they should help us protect it.
Though he declined to identify the 7 governments his administration has contacted, Trump said this weekend he expected many countries would send warships to allow shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a conduit for 20% of the world's oil. In a social media post, he said he hoped China, France, Japan, South Korea and Britain would participate. Trump also warned against NATO countries failing to assist the United States. China has said it is in talks with all sides involved and called for a de-escalation of the conflict. However, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has refrained from sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz, with authorities considering only the option of deploying drones to search for mines. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi also showed resistance, saying Japan has no plans to dispatch naval vessels to escort ships in the Middle East. Takaichi said her government is currently assessing what steps may be required.
As we have not yet received any such requests, it is difficult for us to respond to hypothetical matters. The Japanese government is currently examining what necessary measures should be taken. Of course, this will be within the Japanese legal framework, but we are proceeding with consideration as to how we can protect the lives of Japanese vessels and their crews, and what can be done in such regards.
France, Germany, Australia and South Korea have also signalled reluctance to answer the US president's demand, as international concern grows that the war could be prolonged indefinitely.
Well, to help us unpack what this could mean for global security and energy markets, I'm joined now by Tom Armbruster, former United States ambassador. He's joining us from New York. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Let me start with a very basic question, if that's okay. The US is asking for this help from other countries to police the Strait of Hormuz, but what exactly is it hoping to achieve? Is this just about getting the numbers up, practical support, or is it more about sort of political alignment?
I think it's a little bit too little too late, in that there was not the diplomatic push either domestically in the United States to inform the public about what this conflict really meant to the United States, nor was there a diplomatic effort among our allies to say, this is why it's important, this is what we're going to need. It's been very much a reaction to events. So I think they've got it a little bit backwards. And as you mentioned, we see in NATO, Italy has politely said no. Spain definitely said no and has in fact called this illegal. The UK is, as usual, trying to pull a coalition together and do some of the planning. But it's an uphill battle, and I think that it's a very good lesson for President Trump in coalition building.
And you mentioned NATO there. Some analysts would argue, well, look, this is not NATO's war. You know, NATO didn't initiate this. Israel is not a NATO member, for example. President Trump argues that anyone who benefits in some way from oil flowing through this stretch of water, that should help, they should help secure it. Do you think that will persuade allies, or could it actually create more friction?
I think the case has been made that NATO can play a stabilizing role in many parts of the world. NATO was a player in Afghanistan, for example. So I think the basic premise that this is part of NATO's mandate to keep the world a safer place is not hard to make. But for individual countries to commit forces, I think that's a bit more difficult, especially when the end game is really in question. We were talking initially about regime change or securing the fissile material. Now it seems like the minimum goal seems to be just reading the straits, which I'm not sure a lot of service people or a lot of countries want to sign up for, to potentially sacrifice their service members to get back to where we were before the conflict began. So I think there has to be a wider purpose for the war that has to be explained, and I think the individual countries are gonna make their own choices, as we've seen with Japan saying no as well. So there's a lot of diplomatic legwork to be done on the Allies' side, and there's also not a diplomatic framework to work with the Iranians to get to some sort of new agreement. So I think we're way behind diplomatically.
Saying no to Donald Trump isn't the easiest thing to do, as many leaders have found out. Do you think this hesitancy will hold out, or do you expect that some leaders will cave under pressure and we will see something more approaching a coalition to police and to sort of take back control of the Strait of Hormuz?
I think there will be some accommodation for President Trump, and I think politically other countries realize what's at stake for him. The stakes are quite high, and so no ally wants to say no completely. But Trump has also not played a very good game with the allies, with tariffs and things like that, downplaying NATO. So again, this is a real lesson, I think, in the fact that America's go it alone strategy does not work in today's world. You do need friends, and you need allies that can help you accomplish your goals. And now more than ever, not just militarily, but at some point, we are going to have a diplomatic talk with the Iranians, and there's going to be a need for intermediaries, and there's going to be a need for real negotiators. So there's a lot of work to be done there as well.
And in terms of the perspectives in other capital cities, do you think this tactic of might is right? Sort of you need to do what I say because I'm more powerful, rather than genuine friendship. Do you think that strategy is to some degree almost sort of got a relatively short shelf life left?
Yes, I think you're right about that. And we've seen some protests break out. I think President Trump thinks in the short term, and that is a problem with something like this, where it really takes time to make your case to the public, to build your alliances, and also beforehand to even figure out what the goals are. And I don't think that was done in this case. So in other capitals, I don't think other countries are going to be very keen to sign on to adventures like this without the planning and the diplomacy needed to make it successful, or at least to have some outcomes that bring us to a point that's better than the point before the conflict. And right now, we're not there.
And some analysts would argue that we're in this moment of transition, and people have used terms like we're moving from a multilateral world to a multipolar world. There's a sense in which we're not really sure what the new rules are yet. Do you expect the sort of global order to emerge from this and sort of reset in some new, sensible way, that multilateralism isn't dead, it's just sort of reshaping itself almost?
I don't think that this is anything more than disruptive. This is disruptive and not transformative. We're not seeing completely new alliances. NATO is still held together and will stay together. The normal alliances still hold, but I think there's going to be back and forth and disagreement. And so, no, I don't see this as a turning point that reshapes the world unless, for example, China were to look at this as an opportunity and emboldens them to take some action against Taiwan or something like that, which I don't see China doing right now. They've been keeping their powder dry, watching this conflict unfold. But there are a lot of unintended consequences. Russia getting more money for oil, Russia supplying intelligence to the Iranians. There's going to be a lot of blowback from this. But at this point, I think Trump has a fairly short-term attention span, and I don't see this as really transforming the geopolitical landscape.
And Ambassador, some countries in the region may worry that a larger naval presence could inflame tensions rather than calm them down. How delicate is that balance right now?
Well, you're right about that. If the addition of naval forces, if they were to be damaged, and we've seen that Iran can inflict damage, if they go in there and it creates stability, then I think we're lucky, but it's a risk. You know, anytime you have forces in the region and you have someone as capable as Iran in inflicting damage in the region, there's a real risk, and that's why countries are thinking twice about this. But there is a chance that with enough firepower, Iran would think twice and things would calm down. It's very unpredictable, and I think that's been a hallmark of Trump's foreign policy.
Ambassador, we thank you very much for joining us on Primetime tonight. We appreciate it very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, for a look at how this is being received inside the United States, I'm joined now by Peter Roff, Newsweek contributor and political analyst. Peter, very, very good indeed to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Very interesting this, isn't it? Because we've spoken about the politicians and what they think. What about the lawmakers and political figures within Washington? What's been the reaction on Capitol Hill? Are they crying out for more help alongside Donald Trump, or are they actually getting a bit tired of the war? What's their reaction?
Well, the natural tendency of politicians is to be risk averse. And so President Trump finds himself not entirely alone, but mostly alone on Capitol Hill. You'll hear far more Democrats decrying every element of Operation Epic Fury than you will Republicans standing up for it. Now, what people who aren't in the United States need to understand is that for about somewhere under 50% of the population, but over 40%, that Trump himself is a dog whistle. And to raise him up is to invoke a loud, cacophonous, ugly sound that irritates people. And so anything associated with Trump is toxic. Karl Rove, formerly of the Bush White House, now of the Wall Street Journal, made this point very well on one of the Sunday shows this weekend, that if you just ask about the war in Iran in the polling, the country splits about 50-50, maybe a little less. But if you associate it with Trump, the negative goes up much higher.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed, that, Peter. Yeah, polarizing figure for sure. I mean, these warnings, these implied threats, we're all quite used to them now, I think. But he's warned that for NATO it could be very bad if allies refuse to help. How is that kind of language being interpreted at this moment in the context of this crisis?
I think there's so much going on that people are not noticing that piece of it. And I think it's a critical component. First of all, they're not implied threats. They're threats. People need to understand that Donald Trump does what he says he's going to do. He may be long on words, but he's sure on action, unlike many of his predecessors who talked a lot and did a little. Right now, Iran's threat to shut down the Strait of Hormuz has a far bigger impact on Europe than it does on the United States. Number one, we're a net energy exporter at this point, thanks to Trump's energy policies. Number two, most of our imports come from Canada and Mexico. So the closure of the Strait of Hormuz isn't an oil shock for us, like it is for our NATO allies. Keeping the Strait of Hormuz open is a NATO project. And if NATO members don't understand that, if NATO members can't see that, then NATO members aren't willing to defend their own interests, which is going to strengthen the arguments
Peter,
of that wing of the Trump movement that says, let's forget about NATO.
You could say, though, on the other side of things, that it wasn't NATO that started this. Israel is not a NATO member, for example. Do you not think they've got some kind of case there?
Well, you could say that, but so what?
Well,
it's
a
real issue now. The threat to close the Strait of Hormuz is now an issue, and that threatens NATO. NATO, I don't think NATO has ever expected to be responsible, to be the cause for anything that requires NATO action. This may sound like a small point, but it's a very basic point. They have to deal with the real world.
Yes.
And they now are in a situation where the Strait of Hormuz, freedom of the seas, is threatened, where global energy supplies going to Europe, going to NATO countries are threatened. And if they're not willing to act in defense of that, they are not willing to act in their own defense, which gives a lot of push to the argument of the people in the United States, and I'm not one of them, but the people in the United States who make the argument of why are we spending so many billions and trillions of dollars of money on this alliance, which basically allows a lot of the Western European countries to cheat on their military budgets and divert the money into social welfare spending. But Peter, because they're snug and safe under our military umbrella.
Peter, he's made that point. He has made that point very publicly in a very strong way multiple times. He's publicly told off the NATO members. He's pushed them and forced them to at least consider paying more. Is there not also room for a different approach to work alongside that? To say, yeah, of course, we're the most powerful country in the world. Of course, we're the most powerful NATO member, but we are also a member. We're not just the boss. Or is that just not an approach that Donald Trump would consider?
I don't think that enters into Trump's calculation. I think other presidents perhaps might say that, but Trump says we pay the most money, we get the best seats, we get the amenities, we get we may be equals, but we're first among equals. We really call the shots. The Supreme Allied Commander of NATO is almost always an American.
Yes.
We have an oversized role in NATO. We share an oversized part of the defensive, of the responsibility for providing the defense umbrella. And that's been very clear. And starting in 2015, when he first started running for president, Donald Trump said, is it really worth that money that we're spending? We're going broke here as a country. Is it really worth it for us to be spending so much money to be defending Berlin and Paris and London and Madrid given our precarious economic position here at home? Should they be paying more to defend themselves?
And how does that line of argument, Peter, play with voters? Because there's long been this debate in US politics about allies pulling or not pulling their weight. What about voters? How do they see this point that Donald Trump is continuously stressing?
I don't think it really matters much to most voters. Certainly, there are some highly educated, affluent voters who worry about global affairs, who may calculate U.S. polity towards NATO in deciding whom they're going to vote for. I think there's a large block of Americans who are opposed generally to the idea of foreign aid, whether it's commercial, financial, agricultural, or military, and that affects their attitudes, but not their voting choices. Most Americans don't vote on foreign affairs.
And in terms of the public's attitude towards the war as a whole, where is that at this point? Is it broadly following along party lines, or are we seeing an increase or a decrease in support for the war as it's continued to develop?
I think it's broadly following the lines dictated by the national American press, which tends to be skeptical, unsure of the rationale, unwilling to explain it, nervous about the regime change up to this point, easy to and ready to embrace an Armageddon outcome, because again, the American media is not shy about making its feelings known about Trump. And I think that its analysis of this war is sublimated to its feelings about Trump. Most network correspondents cannot or will not explain that as far as Iran is concerned, they've been at war with the United States since 1979, and they've said so repeatedly. You know, that alone is reason to give pause. And we haven't had, even a 30-minute special on any of the network channels here in America saying the Iran bomb, threat, real or imagined, to discuss exactly how fast you could get from 60% enriched uranium to 90% enriched uranium and how hard it is to make an atomic device. No thoughtful analysis, lots of speculation about how destabilizing this could be for the regime, how it could send oil prices through, you can get all the doom and gloom you want. Very little explanation of the danger. And frankly, I don't necessarily blame the White House for this. I think that for far too long, the people who cover geopolitics in the United States have tried to hide their heads in the sand rather than explain how much of the world situation America has to deal with is the result of actions taken by the regime in Tehran.
With all that in mind, Peter, then, do you think, is it clear whether the overall net effect of this war has benefited Trump politically, or whether it's actually reduced his support? And what do you think is likely to happen if it continues over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks?
I think right now, in process, I think it's been very helpful with his base. I think it's been somewhat helpful, but not as helpful as I thought it might have been among non-aligned voters, so-called independents. I think it has hardened the resolve of Democrats to get him out of the White House one way or another. So it's a mixed bag. The more good news, the better it will be for Trump. And I think in hindsight, much as the case I think is with Venezuela right now, looking back, after it's over, after it's a success, people will feel a lot better about it. Right now, they're feeling very nervous because the people they watch on television are telling them to be nervous.
Very interesting indeed. Peter, we always enjoy speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis, for joining us. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the European Union's naval mission in the Middle East and why ministers in Brussels appear reluctant to expand it into the Strait of Hormuz. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, European Union foreign ministers have now met in Brussels to discuss whether the bloc should strengthen its naval mission in the Middle East, known as ASPIDES, but diplomats say the talks are unlikely to result in any immediate expansion of the operation into the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the mission was launched in 2024 to protect commercial shipping from Yemen's Houthi rebels. It currently involves vessels from Greece and Italy, with additional support from France. Officials say the discussions have centred on a push by the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, for more member states to contribute ships and resources. Diplomats also note that any extension of the mission into the Strait of Hormuz would require unanimous approval from all 27 EU member states, making such a step unlikely for now. Well, let's turn now to the European dimension of this story. I'm joined by Yelena Novikov, analyst and journalist covering the Middle East affairs. She's joining us from Belgrade in Serbia. Yelena, very good indeed to see you there. Thank you for joining us on Prime Time. I mean, all of this sounds very serious, strengthening the EU's naval mission in the region. How seriously is Europe viewing this situation right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. There are two key factors for not just the EU, but also the UK, as well as candidate states, including Serbia and other Western Balkan countries. Number one being securing the economy and energy. And I think that is also the more immediate concern for Brussels and for London and the Balkan states. The other one, of course, being human rights and international law. However, any kind of involvement, especially direct involvement on the side of the US at this point, is out of the question. I don't think that Europe is willing to risk being dragged into another US-led war in a situation where the Ukraine war is still ongoing. We do not really know when it will end or how it will end, and I don't think that Europe can afford to be involved in another place as well. And of course, Europe's primary power isn't a military one, it's diplomatic. So I think that any kind of involvement that European countries, maybe not EU as a whole, but individual European countries may strive for with Iran is strictly a diplomatic one. We have heard reports that France is keeping its line with Tehran open, and that it's trying to make a coalition, not just of European states, but also some Asian states including India, to basically jointly petition for the security of their own vessels of the Strait. But I do not believe there will be any direct involvement by Brussels or any other European capital.
Yelena, this Aspides mission wasn't designed for this, was it? It was designed to deal with the Houthis. Do you think there's a danger here that lines get blurred, responsibilities get mixed, and the EU finds itself being dragged into a conflict far greater than one the mission was originally designed for?
No, I don't think there is a high risk for that. They might be able to get a few more vessels, but they will not send them to the Strait. They will perhaps be in the region, but will not get involved directly in this conflict at all. Europe will seek to negotiate to secure its economy and its energy supply as much as possible. Whether that mission will expand or not, it will still not impact the conflict. It will not directly endanger Iran, because again, I think this is going to be primarily a diplomatic mission. I don't think that European leaders are necessarily interested in securing the Strait militarily, especially because the trust in the US across Europe is probably at a low sense time anyway, and I would certainly hope that certain lessons from Iraq have been learned. So no, Europe will, in my belief, strictly stick to these diplomatic negotiations that are currently going on leading with France and Paris and Tehran, and perhaps some other EU nations will join too.
So any expansion towards the Strait of Hormuz, that would require agreement from all 27 EU member states. I mean, from what you're saying, that's going to be extremely unlikely to happen, isn't it?
Yes. We have seen several European leaders now openly speak against joining the war. Of course, the Spanish Prime Minister is leading that movement, let's say. Even the Italian Prime Minister, who is one of the European leaders who is closest to Trump, has recently said that Italy is not going to be involved in the war in the Middle East, though that might change after this week's constitutional referendum. Giorgia Meloni is known to switch positions, typically align with the US, but depending on how that referendum goes, perhaps she will switch her language, her rhetoric, but I do not think that she would be willing to engage in anything, especially if other EU countries, bigger EU countries that are more militarily powerful, like France, like Germany and even the UK that's now outside the EU, I don't think that even she would be willing to engage. And this is, in a way, this is a chance for Europe to engage in diplomacy, because despite what Trump has previously stated, this situation has showed us that the US does indeed need friends, that it does not have any plan how to exit this war. I'm not sure that Trump even knows what the current goal of this war is, since Ayatollah has been killed. The regime is still ongoing. Iran has rejected ceasefire. So, in a way, it is an opportunity for Europe if they can wait enough and play this smartly, it is a way for Europe to perhaps play the role of a mediator between the US and Iran if that individual agreement with France and some other European countries is achieved first. So in that way, Europe can almost win this war without ever participating in it. Given that this potential role as a mediator, they can also ask the United States for some tariff relief, and they will also get open passage to the strait.
In the meantime, though, Yelena, whilst they are waiting, that we're seeing different views, disagreements, aren't we, emerging across member states. Spain took a different view. Ireland took a pretty similar view. Then you've got Germany on the other side, Italy you've mentioned. Do you sense there's a growing debate, growing disagreement in Europe about whether the bloc is being pulled into a conflict that it never expected to be part of?
Well, even now you mentioned Germany, even their foreign minister has recently said that the previous mission against the Houthis was ineffective. So I think that the consensus, after some, of course, Europe has a very complicated bureaucracy, but after a while, I think the consensus will be that none of the member states will participate in any kind of a direct actions. However, there is always that risk of them allowing their military bases to be used by the US, which then in turn still does make those bases a legitimate target, as Iran says. And the thing is, in this conflict, given that the United States is obviously not a reliable ally to Europe, it will be complicated to be one foot in and 1 foot out. So it will be up to European leaders, again, not just EU leaders, all European leaders, to, I think it's fair to say, for the first time in modern history, take a stand for the international law and not get dragged into another regime change war that can drag on forever, because Ayatollah has been killed, now his son is the new Ayatollah, and so on and so on. Iran has rejected the ceasefire, and I don't think it's in Europe's best interest to get involved into something that they cannot win, especially while still being engaged in Ukraine.
It's very interesting indeed. So, you know, we've got the pressure coming from President Trump, but as you say, it's very difficult, almost unmanageable to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Is it your analysis that the consensus from Europe at this point is in fact to be both feet out?
Yes, but it will not be said in that way. Of course, Europeans are quite diplomatic, and they will try to maintain a certain level of allyship with the United States. However, Europe will not get involved with this directly. Europe will seek to secure its own interests first, because they know, and also we as members, as candidate states, also the United Kingdom, we all know that we cannot rely on the United States for anything, not even within the NATO, which Trump is now again decrying, that nobody's contributing as much as the United States. But then again, he has shown that he can turn on his allies. So it's not in our best interest to engage in something. Of course, that you can make an argument that all of us need the United States and none of us need Iran. Perhaps quite the contrary, if it has powerful weapons, perhaps one day gets close to the nuclear bomb again. But it is time for us to separate ourselves from the United States as much as possible, militarily, technologically, even economically, which again we will be losing in that sphere. The United States will be losing in that sphere due to their own fault. And in this situation, we should truly uphold the international law and condemn the attack on the sovereign country that is Iran. I am not at all saying, and I want to be very clear, I'm not saying at all that I am supporting the regime in Iran, or that any European leader supports the regime in Iran. That they are, of course, we have seen a lot of human rights violations, murders, etc. However, an unprovoked war after false negotiations and false talks is completely illegal, and it should be condemned as such by everyone in Europe.
Time for us to separate from the US as much as possible. I wonder what Mr. Trump would make of that analysis. Yelena, we thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on Primetime.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the very latest business news of the day with Andy Mioch. Do stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Primetime Now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, we'll be taking a look at what Washington is saying about oil prices and how the markets are responding to that. World central banks have been warned by their advisory board not to overreact to these energy prices. London has pledged to support vulnerable households and absorb some of these price increases, and there's some news out of the banking sector as well. So let's have a look. First up, U.S. stocks rose at the start of the week while oil prices pulled back as Wall Street tried to recover from another losing week, with investors monitoring the latest developments of the Iran war.
Wall Street's main indexes opened higher on Monday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added 381 points, or 0.8%. The S&P 500 rose 0.8%, and the Nasdaq Composite gained 1%. Meta shares gained about 2% on a report, which the company has called speculative, that it is planning to lay off more than 20% of its workforce. Additionally, Nvidia shares rose more than 1%. The moves come after the S&P 500 notched its third losing week in a row and closed at its lowest level of the year on Friday. Oil prices rallied last week, with Brent crude settling above $100 per barrel for the first time since 2022. Crude soared as traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping route, has been effectively halted since the war began. In Monday trading, WTI crude traded 4% lower at just below $95 a barrel. It traded above $100 per barrel overnight. Brent crude fell more than 1% at around $101 a barrel.
Still with oil prices, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said that Washington is allowing Iranian oil tankers to transit the Strait of Hormuz to, quote, supply the rest of the world. The strait has been effectively shut since the start of the conflict, leading oil prices to surge.
This is going to be a little quick today.
The United States is allowing Iranian oil tankers to transit the Strait of Hormuz, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CNBC in an interview on Monday. Tanker traffic through the strait has plunged as Iran attacks commercial ships in the Persian Gulf. But the Islamic Republic has continued to export millions of barrels of oil through the narrow sea route despite the large U.S. Navy presence in the region. Iran exports about 1.5 million barrels per day. Bessent said that tankers that supply India have transited the strait, adding the U.S. believes some Chinese ships are also making it out of the Gulf. The U.S. Treasury Secretary said oil prices should fall much lower than $80 per barrel after the war is over.
The Bank for International Settlements, that advises the world's central banks, urged decision makers not to overreact to the Iran conflict-driven spike in global energy prices. The warning comes as leading central banks are set to hold meetings this week as the economic impacts of the war are being weighed.
The body that advises the world's central banks has urged policymakers not to overreact to the Iran crisis-driven spike in global energy prices. The central bank umbrella group's top economic advisor, Hyun Song Shin, called it a textbook case of when to look through a shock, especially if it proves temporary. This month's 40% surge in oil prices and near 60% leap in wholesale gas prices have evoked comparisons to 2022, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the post-COVID reopening of the global economy sent inflation rates soaring. Leading central banks, including the US Federal Reserve and European Central Bank, raised interest rates to their highest levels in decades, but were criticized for reacting too slowly after mistakenly judging the impact would be transitory. This time, financial markets have been quick to reprice expectations, betting central banks won't want to make the same mistake again, although the Bank for International Settlements used its latest report to urge caution. The bank's comments come at the start of a crucial week for markets, with the Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, Bank of England and Bank of Japan all holding their first meetings since the Middle East crisis erupted on February 28th.
Still with Iran war-related news, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said the government will provide $70 million to help vulnerable households who have been hit by a sharp increase in the price of heating oil. Unlike UK consumers who use gas and electricity for heating, prices for households using oil are not capped by the national regulator.
Britain will provide a £53 million or $70.3 million package to help the most vulnerable households cope with the rising cost of heating oil, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Monday, as the conflict in the Middle East continues. The government said the price of kerosene, fuel used for heating oil, has been especially affected by the conflict in the Middle East and now stands at twice the cost of crude oil. The financial support will be especially beneficial for low-income households in rural areas, particularly in Northern Ireland, where a much greater proportion of homes depend on heating oil, the government said. Other measures include introducing stronger consumer protections in the heating oil market and providing support to the competition watchdog to conduct a more comprehensive examination of the industry. Starmer also said he would not allow energy companies to profit from people's hardship, adding that the government was issuing legal directions to ensure companies pass savings on to consumers.
On to the banking sector, UniCredit has launched an offer to build its stake in Commerzbank above 30%, a key regulatory threshold if the lender is to launch a full takeover bid. UniCredit said it did not expect to reach control of the German lender.
Italy's UniCredit launched an unsolicited bid to increase its stake in Commerzbank above 30% on Monday, in an effort to unlock an 18-month stalemate and push its German rival to accept merger talks. The surprise offer, whose modest premium implies a value for Commerzbank of roughly 35 billion euros, ratchets up pressure on the lender and the German government, which have both previously expressed strong opposition to a tie-up. German takeover laws mandate a full buyout offer once a suitor crosses the 30% ownership threshold in a company. UniCredit said its lowball offer should lift its holding just above that threshold and leave it free to buy Commerzbank shares on the market in the future. UniCredit already holds a 26% equity stake in Commerzbank and another 4% through total return swap contracts, while the German government owns a nearly 13% stake.
And finally, in the world of electronics, Foxconn says it expects strong revenue growth throughout the year, even though it posted quarterly profit results below the forecast.
Foxconn, the world's largest contract electronics maker, said on Monday it expected strong revenue growth in the first quarter and the whole of this year, even as it posted a fall of 2% in quarterly profit, lagging estimates. The technology giant, Nvidia's biggest server maker and Apple's top iPhone assembler, blamed a rise in its tax rate for the drop, which came despite robust global demand for AI products and a jump of 22% in fourth quarter revenue. Foxconn's guidance for both first quarter and full year revenue are for strong growth, the highest outlook it can give, as the company does not provide a numeric outlook. It is the first time the company, which generates a significant share of revenue from AI servers, has given an outlook for the full year 2026.
That'd be all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Great stuff, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Washington's new defense strategy and what its sharper focus on China could mean for security across the Indo-Pacific. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing,
Bangkok,
Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Washington is sharpening its military focus as strategic competition with China intensifies. A new US defense strategy is setting clearer priorities and placing tougher expectations on partners across the Indo-Pacific. Here's what that shift could mean for regional security.
The United States has unveiled its 2026 National Defense Strategy, and analysts say it marks a major shift in how Washington plans to use its military power. Unlike previous strategies, this one is not just a policy update. Experts say it represents the outcome of a long debate about America's global role and its military limits. An article published in Foreign Policy states that at the center of the strategy is one clear priority: China. Washington now calls China the main challenge shaping US defense planning. Russia is described as a continuing but secondary threat, while North Korea and Iran remain regional concerns. The strategy focuses on four main goals: defending the US homeland, deterring China in the Indo-Pacific, increasing defense contributions from allies, and rebuilding America's defense industry.
Of course, with the president.
Much of the thinking behind the plan comes from Elbridge Colby, the US Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and a key architect of modern US defense thinking. Colby helped shape the 2018 National Defense Strategy and later outlined his ideas in the book The Strategy of Denial. His core argument is simple: the United States does not need to dominate every region of the world, but it must stop any rival, especially China, from controlling Asia. The strategy therefore puts the Indo-Pacific at the center of US military planning. A key focus is the so-called First Island Chain, a line of islands stretching along East Asia that analysts see as crucial for limiting China's military expansion. This approach also changes expectations for US allies. Countries located near this strategic line, such as South Korea and the Philippines, are expected to strengthen their own defenses and play a more active role in regional security. The strategy keeps some flexibility in other areas. Southeast Asian states and partners like India may still maintain economic ties with China, but security choices that weaken the regional balance will face stronger pressure from Washington. Analysts say this new doctrine brings greater clarity to US strategy, but it also carries risks. Allies that are used to flexibility may resist stricter expectations, especially if greater military spending or political commitments are required. In short, the United States is making a clear strategic bet: concentrate power in Asia, rely more on partners, and prevent China from dominating the region. Whether that strategy succeeds may depend not only on China, but also on how America's allies respond.
Well, to help us step back and look at the bigger strategic picture behind all of this, I'm joined now by Orkan Amishov, Deputy Editor-in-Chief here at A News. Orkan, very good to see you as always. Now, in every sense, we are looking at the bigger picture tonight, Orkan. We've previously been focusing very much on the Strait of Hormuz, undeniably critically important. However, there's something bigger going on here, isn't there, beyond just that location?
Absolutely. Quite often when something very dramatic and highly consequential is happening across the world, in one particular part of the world, our instinct is to look at that development, dissect it, but quite often we miss a larger picture. And quite often it has been suggested, and with the consensus regarding that effectively emerging, that all of these confrontations involving the Venezuela and Iran is not just about Iran and Venezuela, it's about the wider US-China competition. After all, from the US perspective, there's only one power which is on par with the United States, and that must be tackled, that is China. Quite frankly, this is a clear reflection of the change which has been happening over the past couple of years. China is the main competitor, and US does see China as a competitor to be dealt with. Iran is one of the key suppliers, the key supplier of China in terms of oil, and of course, naturally, China gets oil at discount, and it's basically 10-20% below the global benchmarks, Brent benchmarks. But it's very useful. So basically, China provides Iran with all the necessary technologies, enables Iran to fund all of its proxies, which keeps the United States incredibly busy, because the US needs to invest heavily in the Middle East. It needs to heavily help Israel in order to be able to tackle all of these problems. This is effectively China's policy to keep US busy, bogged down in the Middle East, and not being able to compete with China where it matters a great deal, which is in the Pacific region. So the big picture we talk about is that China-US competition, and each single conflict that we have witnessed over the past couple of months, including the last one, inevitably is part of that kaleidoscope event.
Okay, what do you think? Some analysts have spoken about this whole prosecution of this war really being one part of a strategic jigsaw that was started some time ago. They talk about the US and the work done in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Preempting this, and the combination of the two actually putting enormous pressure on China.
Absolutely. Venezuela was part of the self-same thinking. It was about actually weakening China's economic prowess, enabling the United States to cut off that supply chain. And Iran is part of the similar dimension. It's more about China than about Russia, of course. We have discussed on a number of occasions. Regarding this latest, the doctrine of the United States about national defense doctrine, clearly the focus there is that instead of reacting to something after events happen, we should not react in a reactionary fashion, but we need to preemptively conduct our affairs in such a way that our adversaries deny those opportunities. It's all about, in terms of power concentration, resource concentration, focus on the Indo-Pacific in such a way that Europe is becoming secondary. It's no longer key focus of US foreign policy thinking, and the gravity of world politics and bigger competition effectively moving from transatlantic to Indo-Pacific, with China being the key focus. That particular national defense strategy to which we referred earlier focuses on China in such a way that China should be disallowed to project greater power in that region in such a way that that first line of defense involves Taiwan, which is part of China, in line with one China policy, Japan and Philippines becoming the first line of defense. That China should not be able to project any power beyond that first line of defense. That is effectively about making sure China is never able to reach the global supremacy to the extent of challenging US domination. I think there's a clear realization when it comes to US strategic thinking. They understand, and this particular doctrine and the Secretary of Defense, Department of Defense, Elbridge Colby, with whose name this doctrine is associated, this doctrine is effectively acknowledging the US would not be able to govern everything that US wants to govern. You cannot pull the strings everywhere. There will be certain regional domains where regional powers will be pulling the strings. For example, Middle East, Turkey, Israel, and then India and China here, and so forth. But what matters for the United States now, first of all, homeland security, the Western Hemisphere, in the Pacific region, and any commitment to European security becomes secondary matter. And that's the reason we see in US thinking, the thinking that in the light of ongoing war in Ukraine, US does not treat Ukraine as a major risk to its national interests in Europe. What matters for them is China, and therefore US putting massive pressure on NATO allies to increase their budgetary sort of requirements, and 5% contribution to defense spending is one. United States is demanding that NATO allies are to be involved in this unblocking business of the Strait of Hormuz. And we know that European countries have not reacted the way US expected it to react. By means of doing that, US doing two fundamental things. First of all, it treats its European allies, NATO allies, as secondary.
Yes.
We all know that all the empires, Guy, they were envisioning the world in their own image, which is a natural thing. I think US is no longer imagining the world in its own image. US just wants to control vital things. For them, not everything, but what matters now comes to the forefront.
And crucially, Orkan, they're saying it out loud.
Yeah.
Which really hasn't happened before, to my knowledge. We were talking to Peter Roth about this earlier, that everybody knows that the US is the biggest NATO member, is the most powerful country in the world, but it's very rare that a leader would say it so overtly, and it's changed the nature of things, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just about the language and rhetoric. I think it is testifying to something deep happening inside the US establishment. There are others who would sort of attribute this to Donald Trump's personality, but I think it goes beyond his personality. And this probably, I think, testifies to the relative decline of US as a world's superpower. Before in 1990s, even earlier than that, there was no need to say the US was a firmest power, because US was. And when you're quite powerful, you do not need to make that very obvious by means of talking about it, because everybody realizes that you are incredibly important. I think that necessity of talking about extensively, necessity of President Donald Trump always saying that we're the world's greatest power, no power of this magnitude has ever emerged, is actually a reflection that the US is not entirely sure about its own attributes. I think that's the way it's a sign of retrenchment in a certain sense, but it's also a sense of the priorities must be re-established. So the US fully understand it cannot fund everybody, and that's the reason why they are sort of relinquishing their earlier commitments to the UN, and they're focusing on China, because China is the only power around the world which could actually challenge US supremacy. And this gentleman, whose name we mentioned earlier, Elbridge Colby, comes from a very illustrious national security establishment family.
Yes, you were telling me in the break.
His grandfather, William Colby, was director of CIA. He is considered to be bipartisan. He's not particularly, I mean, he's of course, naturally, he's a third ranking, I think, official in the Department of Defense in the United States. He's a key strategist of the Department of Defense, and he's not particularly associated with Republicans or Democrats. And I think what is happening is not just about Trump, it's about US thinking, sort of shifting from transatlantic centered vision to the Indo-Pacific. And in the fullness of time, I think there will be massive challenge for European countries.
Okay, what about Europe in all of this? If you look at the Colby Doctrine, you look at the way the world, for the time being at least, has in many meaningful ways shifted more to a multipolar world than a multilateral one. We've seen hesitancy amongst EU member states and the UK. We've seen disagreement, different positions. The bloc struggling really to appear relevant and integral to some of these negotiations.
Absolutely.
How difficult now is all of this for the EU?
I think it's a massively difficult situation for the European Union and wider European continent, because Europe is increasingly and inevitably, and I would say regrettably, becoming less relevant to the entire affairs of the world. Europe 100 years ago was epicenter, but now it's in decline. But the question is that you have to recognize that you're in decline and you need to do something about it. Because decline not always means terminal decline. It could be reversible. If Europe does fully understand that it should be growth-oriented, it should be European Union, if European Union wants to project greater power, they want to transmogrify from being an economic powerhouse, which Europe is, into geopolitical force, which Europe isn't at this very juncture. It's becoming increasingly irrelevant. I fully understand, I'm sure everybody understands that for Europe to be able to maintain its strategic autonomy, it should not follow everything the US is saying. And in many ways, if European countries are not part of this US-Israel joint attack on Iran, there are many reasons why they shouldn't be involved in that. First of all, their resources are quite limited. I think UK foreign policy was very judicious in the context of not being involved in the offensive strike, by letting US use UK bases for defensive purposes. But the problem there is that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer failed to manage the special relationship. I think the policy thinking behind what UK has been doing regarding this conflict was absolutely judicious. UK shouldn't be part of it, but UK should make sure that the special relationship is not damaged, and it is being damaged because of what Trump said earlier about UK being once a United States' greatest power, greatest ally, is something which will not be rectified in the fullness of time. There are certain elements of damage which, when they are done, they produce long-term consequences. I'm afraid the special relationship is no longer what it used to be. I think we could talk about a special relationship, not the special relationship. Number two fact, please do.
I'm just thinking, if the UK cannot or will not get closer to Donald Trump, does it not make sense for them to try to get closer to Europe?
Well, perhaps, but the entire US, this would be the best possible thing under the current administration for Sir Keir Starmer, who is not a Brexiteer, but Remainer, and currently his government is pursuing the policy of getting closer to Europe. But I think that if once you're outside the European Union, your policy should have been based on actually navigating between the two power centers, Washington and Brussels. Going back to Europe would diminish UK's standing, and UK should do the best thing humanly imaginable, try to navigate between those two power centers. Another important point when it comes to UK and Europe is their foreign policy towards China. So basically, when US is treating China as a key competitor, Europe's importance is naturally diminishing. But Europe has got its own relationship with China, which is not really in line with US foreign policy. And a very good example of that distinction, that fundamental discrepancy when it comes to Europe and the United States is this middle corridor geography, which brings us to the point when we can actually apply the new national defense strategy of the US into Azerbaijani circumstances and its environs. US is interested in the middle corridor because the US wants Central Asia to be connected with Europe. And US wants to get access to the rare earth minerals of Central Asia, but does not want China to benefit from that. And that will create a completely new reality for this region because, as you know, Azerbaijan has got good relations with China, in fact, comprehensive strategic partnership, but also growing strategic relation with the United States. So this region, this act will be able to navigate, to make sure this region, South Caucasus, is not the place of geopolitical contest. Currently it isn't, but potentially it may be, and we need to be ready for every eventuality when the right time comes. Yeah, it's certainly becoming more of a conduit than a contest for sure. And we've seen in Europe, haven't we, many European leaders really make strong overtures to China, visits by Merz, Macron, Starmer. Unclear what tangibly has emerged from that. I mean, even Charles Michel, former president of European Council, whom I interviewed on one occasion, and some other colleagues interviewed as well, has been talking about Europe being in need of having this independent policy with interests of Europe taken into account in such a way that China becomes the central focal point. Because what matters for Europe, and transatlantic rupture has happened a long time ago. This was a consensus post-1945 world. And Britain, France, despite the fact that they emerged as victors, they were heavily reliant on the United States. And that worked for 50 years, basically. And after the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Cold War mentality gave way to new realities, wherein China found itself as a new country. And soon later, it emerged as a key competitor. And Europe is no longer in a position of being that relevant to United States. Because when the Soviet Union was in existence, they did treat Soviet Union as a key enemy. And if you treat Soviet Union as a key enemy, naturally you need to be very supportive of the European Union, back to the European community. But now that Russia is considered to be secondary, the importance of the war in Ukraine is not that massively important to the United States. That's the reason they say, well, it's dangerous, of course. Of course, it's bad that Ukraine's 20% of territory is occupied, but we can't help it. It's not the key priority. And in fact, perhaps Russia is not completely wrong. And this goes, in that particular respect, Europe and the United States are at loggerheads. But when it comes to China, they're again at loggerheads because Europe needs to have good and mutually beneficial relations with China, whereas the US is fully hell-bent on diminishing China's role. So really, we've moved from transatlantic rupture to a new sort of a competition between Europe and the United States.
And do you think that if that endures, that situation between Europe and the United States, that it could push Europe to making stronger and stronger connections with China, at the continued expense of their relationship with the US?
I'm afraid this is exactly what is happening now. This is what you said, the central element of what's happening, with Europe being disillusioned with the United States, and with United States national strategy having absolutely no mention of Europe and actually being very critical of Europe. Europe naturally, in order to maintain and entrench its autonomy, will do its level best to have constructive relations with China in order to balance China against the United States. So we're no longer talking about, I interviewed Romano Prodi recently, a couple of days ago, and I interviewed Bonnet in a couple of days, and he was incredibly unhappy and very skeptical about the future of Europe. I said, well, look, Mr. Prime Minister, just 100 years ago, Europe was the epicenter of the world. When you were talking about the world politics, you meant London, Paris, and to a certain extent even Rome, Berlin, and definitely not Washington. Now things have changed so dramatically that Europe is no longer epicenter, but Europe is secondary. What will become of Europe? And to be absolutely honest with you, and he's 92 years old, and he has seen a lot of things. He has not been just Prime Minister of Italy, but also President of the European Commission. He wasn't very hopeful, and I didn't see any glimpse of hope economically in his eyes when I put that question to him.
I mean, President Trump is, I think it's fair to say, playing a pretty dangerous game militarily and potentially one economically too. Do you think, obviously, enormous GDP, huge military power. It would take a lot to cause serious damage to such a huge country. But do you think there is a possibility here that they could have miscalculated this relationship between China, Europe, this region here, and also this corridor conduit role that Azerbaijan, Central Asia could play?
Well, I think that there's no miscalculation when it comes to Azerbaijan and South Caucasus. US does not treat this region as the place where it's going to compete with China, which provides for actors in this region, Azerbaijan and others, maneuverability, which they're going to enjoy fully. I think United States, I'm always talking about UK, United States is fully conscious of the fact that this region is exercising geopolitical balancing act, and there's nothing wrong about it, because China is not really very powerful here. But when it comes to the wider picture regarding Iran, there might have been some miscalculation, but I think President Donald Trump, for all the bombastic part of his persona, is driven by cold reason, whether we like it or not. The fact that he's diminishing Europe is not necessarily against American interests. He does consider Europe as a weakest link in the transatlantic alliance, if there is such an alliance still. But of course, naturally, intelligence sharing, all of these things are in place. Miscalculation is indeed possible. But I think the key parameters of his foreign policy, which sees China as a main enemy and tries to limited without actually dismantling it. There's no question of China being sort of dismantled from the US perspective. China is an important power. China accounts for the 20-25% of the world's GDP, and that the 50% of the world's GDP is actually concentrated in this part of the world. The United States is not against China being powerful here. The United States does not want China project power beyond this region, and hence this entire concept of first line of defense, including those three entities: Taiwan, which is part of China, Japan, and the Philippines.
Fascinating stuff, Wolfgang. Always a delight to have you with us in the studio.
Pleasure and privilege of mine.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we take a look at Kazakhstan's constitutional referendum and what the result could mean for the country's political future. Please stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Yaptığınız atışa hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
Welcome back to Primetime. Kazakhstan has approved a new constitution according to exit polls. Nearly 90% of voters supported the proposed changes in preliminary surveys, meaning President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev is likely to remain in power until 2029. Here's more on that story. Kazakh voters approved a new constitution in a referendum on Sunday that may provide President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev with a loophole allowing him to stay in power beyond 2029, according to exit polls. Two exit polls showed that around 87% of voters backed the new constitution. The Electoral Commission earlier said voter turnout stood at 73%. The new constitution streamlines the country's parliament and recreates the post of vice president, which was abolished in 1996. It also gives the president the right to appoint the vice president, along with several other key officials. While reviewing the preliminary exit poll results, the president of Kazakhstan said the vote showed the political culture of Kazakh society.
The citizens of our country supported the constitutional reform and actively participated in the referendum. They voted for the future of our homeland. This is a very good event. This decision will forever remain in world history. I have no doubts about this, because this is a symbol of true patriotism in our citizens.
When asked by a reporter whether the constitution would facilitate a future transfer of power, Tokayev said the next presidential election would take place in 2029, when his current term ends. Voting in the referendum took place at more than 10,000 polling stations across the country. Another 71 polling stations operated at Kazakhstan's representative offices in 54 countries. More than 12 million citizens were included on the list of referendum participants. Well, to help us understand what these constitutional changes could mean for Kazakhstan, I'm joined now by Nurbalat Nishanbayev, an associate professor at Turan University in Almaty. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Great to see you there. Let's talk about the overall result, because it was pretty dramatic. Exit polls suggest strong support for the new constitution. What do you think that tells us about the political mood right now in Kazakhstan?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me here in this. The second thing is I agree that this is very geopolitically full of tension periods, but the Kazakhstan organized a referendum accepting on the new draft of constitutions. I think here we should mention what is the uniqueness of this draft constitutions, why the referendum is important. The first thing is this new constitution upgrades political governance system, is the first thing. The second thing, we see political system since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they should be upgraded into the new form due to the changes around. So therefore, the time for the people's understanding on the referendum, we have seen quite high interest. The turnout, it says, according to the exit poll, around 7%. This is comparing with the presidential election and the many other referendums is a little bit higher. I think there are two reasons why the turnout is unusual. The first one, this is the constitutions which impact every single citizen's life. This is very important. Therefore, among the countries, we have realized that at least if they don't support, they came and they voted against. So this kind of movement, it shows us how the political culture is changing at the third decade of the independence.
Nurbalat, these reforms change a large portion of the constitution, don't they? For viewers perhaps unfamiliar with Kazakhstan, trying to understand what's happening, what do you think are the most important changes?
Well, the number one, I would say, we are offering a new position of vice president. So before the 1995, we have had a vice president position. Now we are offering. The second aspect is legislative organ, parliament. We are changing from bicameral to the unicameral and renaming it Kurultay. But the number of deputies, member of parliament is the same, 155. The next, one of the most important aspect is the members for the parliament, the new called Kurultay, will be elected in proportional way. It means the parties will raise based on the income, then according to the what they achieve result of election, they will decide, of course, how many quotes they will get from the Kurultays. So, of course, here a few years ago, Kazakhstan also implemented the new law political parties, the quotes for, in particular, for women, in particular to youth, and the people with a special need. So, therefore, those aspects are one of the important part of the new constitution. Also, we shouldn't forget about the status of the Kazakh language. In the constitution, it was clearly written that Kazakh language, but the Russian language considers at equal level with the Kazakh language. It's a state public. But in the new constitution, have seen role of the Russian language considered not equal, but along with the Kazakh language. So I think it also shows to which side Kazakhstan is, also to what political institutions are recreating itself in this period.
Nabila, I should just say some slight apologies to our viewers. We're having one or two technical issues with the connection. We can still hear you, and we do want to stay with this because it's such an important story in such an important country in our region. Supporters say that the reforms modernise the political system, don't they? What, from your perspective, how significantly will they actually change how the country is governed?
Well, I should look at this one from pretty realistic vision, because just accepting a new constitution will not everything unless the civil society, unless the political leadership has some intention for the change. So the role of the new constitutions definitely will limit the super presidency at first. Second, it will share the among the three part of the power. First, judicial, then legislative government. So since the current president came to the power back in 2019, he created his new. It says strong president and responsible parliament and an active government. So this formula is working now, but the constitutions will be the base of the so-called new Kazakhstan, because we know that President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, since he came to the power, promoting the slow new Kazakhstan, but the constitution as well, it definitely provides a new active. If we look at the prior constitution, which accepted 1995, the situation, the political structure was different comparing now. So therefore, in 2026, I think the change for the constitution definitely will create the password. But anyhow, what extent it will be implemented, it's a matter.
And then the changes could also shape, as you've touched on, the president's position in the coming years, politically speaking. I mean, what does this mean, do you think, for Kazakhstan's leadership going forward?
Well, the thing is, like yesterday, President himself pointed out that there will not be kind of elections until 29. Yes. So it means, so many experts and many other factors, we are waiting for, maybe they will organize preliminary presidential election. The second is, as I have mentioned already, until now we had two chambers of the parliament, the chamber we call Senate, the head of the Senate considered according to the constitution as a second person. Now we are moving from bicameral to unicameral. Now we don't have a Senate. According to the new constitutions, the second person will be the vice president. So the vice president will be identified with the agreement parliament, and the president will offer and the parliament should support. So the president will stay in power in 7 years only one term. The amendments which we have had in back 2022, I think, and this amendment stays the same in existing upcoming draft constitutions. So we are still waiting for the official result of the referendum from the Central Election Commission, but exit polls 87%. So 3 institutions are exit polls. Usually in the practice of Kazakhstan, the official result will be pretty similar to the exit polls in my experience, which is following the last 20 elections. So therefore, these new constitutions will reshape the political governance systems. The second is it will give more authority to the parliament. Also, for the long term, I think we, Kazakhstani society, we need to pay more attention to the political, not only political system, but the political party system. Because unfortunately, since we got independence, we had the leading political parties and the rest of them were kind of weak. So therefore, I think as a political expert, now time to create political parties based on some ideas. So like democratic countries, doing right-wing parties, the parties which has their own ideologies to offer alternative vision to the society. So therefore, it's a very critical time for the political parties to what extent they will be competitive in the new period, let's say.
Nabila, very interesting indeed. We thank you very much for your analysis and for joining us live from Kazakhstan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, after the break, we check in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments from their regions. Do stay with us.
Long before partition, Pakistanis were singled out, attacked, and forced from their homes.
More than 200,000 Muslims were eliminated through massacres, through displacement.
In all Indian states, the communities are being oppressed, and the Indian Army is committing atrocities against them.
I left Indian-occupied Kashmir and came to Azad Kashmir on foot.
We cannot even go to the graves of our loved ones. We cannot even pray for them.
What is the fault of the Kashmiri people?
Kashmir is the place where partition never ended.
The region of Kashmir is between 3 nuclear powers.
If a nuclear war breaks out here, not only the South Asia, but the entire world will be affected.
If India believes that people of Jammu and Kashmir are with them, let them go for their referendum tomorrow.
For a Kashmiri, what matters the most is Azadi, is the right of self-determination. Azadi from Indian hegemony.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note. It's a fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Ainud.
Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. Okay, let's head to our correspondents now around the world. And as we've been discussing tonight, tensions continue to rise around the Strait of Hormuz after Iran disrupted shipping through this vital oil route. US President Donald Trump has called on allies to help secure the waterway, but Britain has so far stopped short of committing warships. A News' correspondent Zainab Farizada has more.
Britain has so far declined to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, despite US President Donald Trump urging allies to help secure the vital shipping route amid the ongoing conflict involving Iran. The US President called on partners including the UK, France, Japan and South Korea to deploy naval vessels to protect commercial shipping moving through the narrow waterway. Officials say the UK could instead contribute mine-hunting drones and other technology to help address security threats in the area while avoiding direct military escalation with Iran.
Firstly, we are working with others to come up with a credible plan for the Straits of Hormuz to ensure that we can reopen shipping and passage through the strait. Let me be clear. That won't be, and it's never been envisaged to be, a NATO mission. That'll have to be an alliance of partners, which is why we're working with partners both in Europe, in the Gulf, and with the US. It's important that we continue that. It is not straightforward, and you can see that historically when there have been other conflicts that have affected the straits. But I do think that working with others, including the US, is the way to go forward.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer said in a speech today that deciding whether to deploy UK troops is the toughest decision any Prime Minister can face. He added that if forces are sent into harm's way, they must have a clear legal basis and a properly thought-out plan. He said the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened to ensure stability in global markets and that the UK is working with allies on a viable plan to restore freedom of navigation in the region. He also insisted the UK will not be drawn into the wider war in the Middle East. The UK Prime Minister spoke by phone with US President Donald Trump on Sunday about the importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz and restoring global shipping through the waterway. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in London on Monday, where the two leaders discussed the ongoing military operations of the United States, Israel and Iran, and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Zainab Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turkey's leading drone manufacturer has unveiled a new long-range kamikaze drone featuring artificial intelligence and swarm flight capabilities. Well, it's developed by Baykar. The system it's designed to operate in contested electronic warfare environments and carry out long-range precision strikes. Here are the details.
Turkish drone manufacturer Baykar has unveiled its newest unmanned combat platform, the K2 Kamikaze UAV. According to the company, the aircraft is the largest kamikaze drone in its class and features AI-driven swarm flight, GPS-denied navigation capability, and a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers. During recent tests, 5 K-2 drones took off from Baykar's flight training and test center in Turkey's northwestern Edirne province. The aircraft carried out multi-day formation flight exercises over the Saros Gulf, performing right echelon, line, and V formation maneuvers. Baykar said the platforms use artificial intelligence, sensors, and onboard software to maintain precise positioning within the swarm, thereby completing all assigned test missions. The K-2 has a maximum takeoff weight of around 800 kilograms and can carry a 200-kilogram warhead. The drone can fly for more than 13 hours, reach speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, and operate at ranges of more than 2,000 kilometers. Engineers say the platform is designed to function even in environments where satellite navigation signals are jammed or unavailable. Baykar said the project aims to produce high-impact unmanned platforms that can be mass-produced at relatively low costs. The company added that future versions of the drone could potentially return to base after delivering their payloads. In recent years, Turkey has emerged as one of the world's leading producers of aerial drones, accounting for an estimated 65% of the global armed drone export market. Baykar alone controls an estimated 60% of this market and has exported drones to more than 35 countries worldwide. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Georgia's government is pushing back against a new resolution from the European Parliament. Well, officials in Tbilisi say the document is detached from reality and have questioned Brussels' authority to judge the country's internal politics. A News correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports now from Tbilisi.
The strongest reaction to the latest resolution of the European Parliament came from Georgia's foreign minister. Maka Bacharishvili dismissed the document, saying European Parliament resolutions on Georgia have long been detached from reality. Her argument went farther than just disagreement with the text itself. She suggested that lawmakers in Brussels have no responsibility for the country's internal political decisions, and therefore their assessments cannot be treated as authoritative. The resolution adopted on March 12 by 438 votes to 37 calls for the immediate release of opposition politician Eleni Khoshtarya and others detained for what European lawmakers describe as politically motivated reasons. It also raises concerns about former President Mikhail Saakashvili's continued imprisonment and deteriorating health, and calls for investigations into allegations of ill treatment of detainees and reports about the use of chemical agents against protesters. Beyond individual cases, the document criticizes laws adopted by the government, including the transparency of foreign influence law and the law on family values and protection of minors, arguing that they restrict political activism, civil protest, and freedom of expression. Government officials responded not only to the criticism itself, but also to the legitimacy of the institution making it. Parliamentary Speaker Shalva Papashvili compared the debate in the European Parliament to the Soviet Congress of People's Deputies, saying the tone of the discussion resembled political attacks against Georgia during the late Soviet period. These reactions illustrate how relations between Tbilisi and European institutions have shifted from policy disagreements to a deeper political confrontation. Since 2024, disputes over democratic reforms, legislation, and Georgia's EU integration path have repeatedly escalated. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, as we've been discussing tonight, Kazakhstan has announced preliminary results from a nationwide referendum on a new constitution. According to the Central Referendum Commission, a majority of voters supported the proposal, which would introduce changes to around 84% of the document. A News correspondent Fariza Kalamazina reports now from Almaty.
87.15% of voters in Kazakhstan supported the adoption of a new constitution in a nationwide referendum. The preliminary results were announced by Kazakhstan's Central Referendum Commission. According to the Commission, more than 9 million people took part in the vote, representing 73.12% of eligible voters. Under national legislation, a referendum is considered valid if at least half of eligible voters participate. After the vote, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev met with representatives of youth organizations. He said he had reviewed the constitutions of many countries and believes Kazakhstan's updated basic law ranks among the most progressive. The president also announced that from now on, March 15th will be marked as Constitution Day, the country's main legal document. Later, speaking to journalists, Tokayev said the next presidential election in Kazakhstan will take place in 2029 in accordance with the current constitution. Responding to speculation about the possible transfer of power and the creation of a vice presidential position, he said such discussions are ongoing, but there is no reason for concern. The president also announced that parliamentary elections will be held this summer as Kazakhstan prepares to transition to a unicameral parliament known as the Kurultai. These changes are also included in the new constitution. According to Tokayev, the country now faces a significant amount of work following the vote. The changes affect around 84% of the constitution, making it the most extensive revision of Kazakhstan's basic law since the independence. The Central Referendum Commission will finalize the results at a separate meeting, with the official outcome to be published in the media no later than March 21st. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
China says it's stepping up diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan after clashes escalated along their shared border. Well, Beijing has now dispatched its special envoy to mediate between the two sides, as fighting and airstrikes have raised fears of further instability in the region. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has held a phone conversation with Afghanistan's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi as Beijing pushes for de-escalation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. According to China's Foreign Ministry, Beijing's special envoy on Afghan affairs is currently traveling between Afghanistan and Pakistan in an effort to mediate and encourage dialogue between the two neighbors. China says it hopes both sides will remain calm and exercise restraint, urging Kabul and Islamabad to hold face-to-face talks as soon as possible. Beijing is also calling for an early ceasefire and for both countries to resolve their disputes through dialogue rather than further military action. The Chinese government says it stands ready to continue playing a constructive role in easing tensions and helping facilitate reconciliation between the two countries. The diplomatic push comes at a time of rising violence along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Clashes intensified over the weekend with reports of airstrikes and cross-border fighting, raising concerns about a further escalation between the two sides. As tensions remain high along the border, regional countries are increasingly attempting to step in diplomatically in hopes of easing tensions and preventing further conflict between the two neighbors. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Uzbekistan's plans to build its first nuclear power plant have been discussed with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Well, the talks come as an IAEA mission prepares to visit the country to review progress on the project. A News correspondent Seville Rajapova reports now from Tashkent.
An International Atomic Energy Agency mission is expected to visit Uzbekistan in the second half of 2026 to assess progress on the country's first nuclear power plant project and review the development of national nuclear infrastructure. Uzbekistan's nuclear energy program was discussed recently during a meeting between the director of Uzbekistan's Atomic Energy Agency, Azim Akhmadkhodjayev, and the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. Uzbekistan plans to build its first nuclear facility in the Jizakh region, where an integrated nuclear complex is expected to include both large-scale capacity reactors and small modular reactors. The project's first stage involves constructing a 330 megawatt small nuclear power plant with 6 reactors, each capable of generating 55 megawatts of electricity. The first reactor is expected to begin operations around 2029. In the longer term, the project may expand to include 2 large VVER 1000 reactors, bringing the total generating capacity of the sites to more than 2.1 gigawatts. At the same time, Uzbekistan is expanding international cooperation on the project. The national agency Uzatom has recently discussed partnership with the French nuclear engineering company Framatome, focusing on advanced automated control systems designed to improve the safety and reliability of future reactors. It is Yulia Jabov reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
US and Chinese officials have begun a new round of economic and trade talks in Paris aimed at easing tensions and laying the groundwork for a possible summit between the two leaders later this year.
Chinese and U.S. officials have begun a new round of economic and trade talks in Paris, aimed at stabilizing bilateral relations and preparing the groundwork for a potential leaders' summit later this year. The meetings are being led by Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and are expected to last around 2 days, with the possibility of further technical negotiations if progress is made. The discussions come as both sides attempt to manage persistent trade tensions while maintaining economic engagement between the world's 2 largest economies. Negotiators are focusing on a range of economic issues, including agricultural, trade, energy imports, aviation purchases, and strategic materials. China has signaled openness to increasing purchases of U.S. farm goods, such as soybeans, poultry, and beef. At the same time, officials are also discussing the possibility of a managed trade framework, where China would commit to purchasing specified volumes of U.S. goods to help narrow the bilateral trade imbalance. Another key topic is supply chain security, especially access to rare earths and other critical materials essential for high-tech manufacturing and defense industries. The talks are also exploring potential mechanisms to manage economic disputes, including proposals for new bilateral structures to facilitate trade opportunities and investment coordination. While no major breakthrough is expected immediately, the Paris meetings are seen as an important step towards reducing economic friction and setting the stage for higher-level dialogue between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Manu Makhdoom, A News, Beijing.
Well, that is all for Prime Time for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.